They wanted to see what the impact of a felony was on a person's being hired. And they found that obviously that felonies impacted American Africans way worse than they impacted white people. I'm sorry, I can't care less for your anecdote. I'm always going to go with the data, and there are plenty of large-scale studies that all demonstrate that the bias and discrimination is primarily and prevalent against American Africans.
Okay, so just American descendants of slavery. So those are the only people that should be paid out initially.
I'm not saying initially. I'm saying this is the focus of this conversation. This independent reparations claim, which doesn't dismiss or diminish any other person's reparations claim.
That's one thing I'm most thankful for X, is it allows me to get into communities and listen from things I would never get to hear before, right? And just listening, and a lot of it comes down to there's a huge cultural difference between different rooms, right? And I think one of the difference we need to kind of get used to is we have to appreciate the cultural differences to understand perspectives. So when we have the big table, like everybody understands, oh, it's not just, no, it's just culturally, this is how it is. You know what I mean? Have perspective on all sides of the table.
Sure. I mean, there are cultural differences. I would never dismiss that. Although I'm really hesitant or reluctant to generalize, because I feel like very often the things that we are calling cultural differences sometimes, a lot of times cultural differences is used as almost like a euphemism for negative stereotypes.
Well, okay, so let me give you an example, maybe more context. Like my friend that I grew up with, he comes from the Korean part of town, and like in the house, the Korean's super loud, and but when you get out in the public, super quiet. So like in the Korean community, we would have to take that into consideration, because if people start talking at the table aggressively, the Korean community, at least from what my perspective is, they kind of become real quiet and docile, and that's not what we want. Is we want that flow of dialogue where everybody feels comfortable to share, right, regardless of all of that stuff.
Sure. I mean, I think it's probably best to create opportunities for everybody's culture, to make sure that their voices are be heard, and that means you're going to have to probably give a little more space to some and a little less space to others. I think it's a good thing.
I mean, because like, look, we're one of the few countries on this planet, when you watch the Olympics, if you watch it anymore, when you watch the opening ceremonies, we're all different colors, shapes, sizes. Everybody from China usually looks the same. Everybody from all of these countries usually look the same. When you see Americans walk in, we're all different, all differences. And so that's like, it's really hard for us to gain traction sometimes, because we can't really use any other country or really as a model, because we really have to do it differently. So that's some of the challenges that we have, I think.
Oh, sure. But I think, look, our culture is unique, and I think sometimes we can just lean upon the models already provided by the past within our own country to determine like what would be the best like options, and I think that's a really effective thing, like just drawing on the lessons learned from the past in order to determine what's best. That's typically what I advocate for. Like in my reparations plan, that's typically what it is. It's, hey, let's mirror things that we've seen work, things that we know work, and let's do those things again properly for the people who are owed it,
I wanted to share a story when I get a moment, JP, but I don't want to interrupt y'all.
No, you're good. And Fanatiq, like that's the coolest thing. Like where we need to be is like, okay, let's just put at a point, this society, we need to put it on a table and see what everything is, so we know where to start, right? Because right now it's like every side is just like keeping real quiet, only talking to each other. And so like having these discussions and understanding perspectives and like, okay, this is why we feel this helps understanding, right? And I think that's the biggest problem is right now is this societies are so segmented, we don't have understanding, but these kinds of conversations will hopefully start providing that understanding that everybody needs, that perspective.
I entirely agree with that. I've never been one to want to speak in an echo chamber, though I do have a lot of conversations with people who think and agree with me. My brother Inside and I speak on a regular basis, and that dude has almost the same brain as me. I mean, we've been around each other so much, we've probably influenced each other quite a bit. And so I would think that, I mean, I have my shared dosage of that, but then in panels and in spaces, I'm constantly encountering conversation with the other people, and I've actively sought after it. I've not really denied conversations to the opposite side or to people who disagree with me. But I do feel like when it comes to some of the bigger debaters, Specifically on the right, it feels like they kind of avoid that. Like Ben Shapiro, he'll talk to college kids, uneducated college kids, but he doesn't really go out of his way to debate people, from who are to the left of him. Same with Steven Crowder. He would go and debate college kids, but he wouldn't really want to debate people on the other side. And that seems to be the case with a lot of Republicans. And I think what it does is, yeah, it furthers these echo chambers, because I think a lot of the debates and things that we're having are based on like misconceptions and misnomers and distortions of like the things that are actually believed and pushed by most people. And so then we can't find middle ground because the other side is armed so heavily against the idea because of the distortion that they've received. And I think,
let me ask you a question. What are you a Gen Y, a Gen Z? Like, what generation do you identify with?
I'm pretty sure I'm a millennial.
Okay, so you're under the age of 40?
Yep.
Okay. And that's the one thing, like, that's like the interesting part of this is, like, lately on our chats and our discussions and our spaces, we've really been diving into Gen X and what Gen X is, because I think that a lot of the perspective in everybody's communities are based off of the older generation, the baby boomers. And that's where some of the negative connotation comes on. And it seems like it's flowing into Gen X, where Gen X is like, we pretty much reject the whole things that baby boomers, the Republicans that baby boomers were, are not the Republicans that Generation X has become, right? Because a lot of us grew up with those racial lines were gone for us. We didn't really care about them. We all had this thing, and it seems like we didn't really get divided till we were in our 20s and 30s. So like this whole thing of Gen X, like trying to like give us, it's our turn, right? Because the baby boomers are starting to lose control of everything, and so now we're going to take control of things. But I think there's a huge difference between our generations and other generations, because really honestly, like knowing a bunch of Gen Xers growing up in that generation, those issues with race and all those things have never been an issue with this generation, right?
And they haven't been an issue for you because you're the status quo. But if you listen to Black, American African Gen Xers, you'll find the exact opposite to be true.
Right. But that's caused by the baby boomers. So that's the thing though. So like inside of this community of Gen Xers, there's a different feel like amongst other Gen Xers. It's usually there's outside influences too, right? Because we got to admit the baby boomers have made things tough for a lot of us. But Black people or Black foundational Americans, whatever you want to call them, specifically, right? But I think that if we're talking Gen X to Gen X, I think that I would like to hear some Gen X to Gen X perspective, because maybe my perspective is wrong, but I think that it's a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Sure. So
I wanted to hear
I'm the youngest of 9.
Go ahead.
I'm the youngest of 9. Okay, so I have elder siblings. All of my siblings. I'm sorry, the youngest in a family of 9. So I have 4 older brothers and 2 older sisters. My oldest brother is 10 years older than me. So I'm pretty sure he's Gen X, and we can just encounter his experience. I'll give you a perfect example of just one, right? From kindergarten for him, where he was going to school, and he was advanced because there was just like this insistence on all of us being scholastically ahead. So we learned reading and counting and writing and all those things long before we started school, and he started preschool. And a teacher directly said to my mother, "I'm not going to have some little black boy be smarter than the rest of my children." She said those words to him. So then it's like, okay, so then that would be an experience. And then you think about the war on drugs, that would have obviously impacted him, and that would be part of his experience. And then you start looking at hiring discriminations and things like that, which have all been verified. And so then we start saying, when, at what time, what year would we say that there were no racial implications and that racism wasn't highly impactful? I would need to know what time period are you talking about? In the 90s? Obviously not, right? We had the Rodney King situation, and goodness knows how many other.
But that's some. Yes, you're exactly right. But that's some of the I think the problem here, because that's all of those things that happen to, I mean, that's terrible that a teacher would ever say that to a student anyways, but like, that's terrible, but that was perpetuated by someone else in that baby boomer class. So that's what I'm saying. Like, once you get out of that baby boomer era of like people and start talking to Gen Xers, the Gen Xers, I'm not saying that people Black America didn't have problems as Gen Xers. What I'm saying is, but if we're talking Gen X people to Gen X people, right? People to people, like it's a totally different perspective. And you're right. When does that begin? But it seems like we're kind of at the end of this boomer revolution, and it seems like Gen X, like, think about it. So who are some of the most impactful people in government right now? You have Josh Hawley, he's doing amazing work, Gen Xer. You have Matt Gaetz, Gen Xer. You have Thomas Massey, Gen Xer. You have a lot of these Gen Xers who haven't really been given the stage yet that are really doing a lot of work. I think Tim Scott's doing a lot of work. There's a lot of different Gen X people in government who are doing amazing work. So I think it's one of those things where we're starting to get traction now. And I think as we get more and more traction, you'll see that it's going to become less and less about it. But you're right. There's got to be a transition from the old guard to the new guard. And it can't just be words. It's got to be actions.
Sure. Can you tell me any of the progressive policies that Matt Gaetz is supporting? Any?
Well, I mean, he supports the death penalty for pedophiles for child acts under the age of 13. I mean, that's a pretty big one right there.
That's not considered progressive. Are there any progressive policies that he's actually supporting?
Wait, hang on. How is that not progressive when literally almost our entire corporation that exists in DC uses children as currency? How is that not important, hun?
I'm sorry.
That's extremely
No.
important to me.
Being important and being progressive are two entirely different things. What, like, I'm not saying it's not important, and I'm not. Hold on, let me finish.
So
I'm not saying I wouldn't.
Trying to shine a light on what's been going on with children for centuries is not progressive.
Just shining a light. What does progressive mean to you?
It sounds to me like it's a one-way street. And if you don't mind, I want to share something with you so you understand where the Gen Xer comes from. And if you don't mind, I just want to share this with you. I grew up in a construction company, and I consider myself to have been raised by the Black men around me. And I admired them for their hard work, and I saw them struggle. I saw one man work for me for 7 years, with me for 7 years, and then the IRS comes and picks him up because he had 10 children and he refused to pay taxes for a long time, and he was 70 years old. And there's not a part of my soul that didn't disagree with that, because I disagreed with that, because he's a good man and he's working his butt off. And I saw their struggles day to day. We worked in neighborhoods where I experienced and saw the struggles day to day, and not one part of my human being believed in that or agreed with that. So one of the men I worked with was Johnny, and he was like my Black brother, and he was older than me, and he taught me. And we talked about all of the things that I can hear in your voice right now that you're angry about. And I don't mean that you sound angry. I know that there's something in your craw, and it's because it was taught. And Johnny invited me one morning. I picked him up every morning for work. One morning, he invited me into his little 2-bedroom apartment to have breakfast, and his wife sat me down and made me a fried bologna and egg sandwich. And I can tell you now, Fanatiq, that was the most soulful sandwich, spiritual sandwich that I've ever eaten in my life, because I was humbled to be invited into his home, no matter what it was, and know that we were both human beings, and that no matter what we disagreed with in that truck during work, working all day long, we hugged each other and we agreed to work towards something better, and that I would always be there for him and he for me. Because it was more in that time and era about being respectful of one another and agreeing and loving each other for what we were. And no way in this world did I agree with all of the things you're mad about still. And I say mad, that you're trying to fix. And I just wanted to share that with you, that I loved every one of those men that I worked with as if we were family. But we were not family. And yet it was more family than I've ever had in my life. And if I see him today, and I think about it often, I want to call him, and we haven't worked together in 25, 30 years. And that's the man I look up to. That's the man I always worry about, because I know where his house was. I know that he raised his children right. They were all smart as a whip. They were as intelligent as you, dude. You are a smart young man. And I hear that. And I want to tell you, I'm proud of you. I don't know you, but I'm proud of who you are. And I can tell you had good parents. And your color doesn't matter to me. And it didn't matter then, and it doesn't matter now, because you are who you are because you had love in your home and they raised you to be a good human being. I'll land it there. I'm sorry.
Listen, I appreciate everything that you're saying, and I think, again, what you're speaking to is a very human experience, and I appreciate that you were able to interact and see the humanity of another American African man, and that they looked at you with such kindred feelings, and I appreciate that. The thing is, I never want you to feel that when I'm talking about the ongoing oppression that is pervasive and some of the racial ideas that are pervasive and continual in both millennials, Gen Xers, Gen Zers, like that is just there. When we start seeing those things, then I don't want you to feel as if I'm indicting any individual, because what I'm always going to be talking about when we're talking about politics is the broader thing. And what's more broad is the idea that even as late as 2021, I want to say it was, that there were still hiring discrimination. So what they did is they did a study, and they paired a black person, an American African, and a white person. So there was two, an American African and a white person. And what they did was they gave one of them randomly a felony and the other one not. And they created a bunch of these types of pairs and had them go apply for these jobs. They wanted to see what the impact of a felony was on a person being hired. And they found that obviously that felonies impacted American Africans way worse than they impacted white people. But here's where it gets even worse. From that study, they were able to determine that even white males with felonies got more callbacks than American Africans without felonies. So the jobs were willing to hire the white felon more readily than they would an American African without a felony in 2021. And I don't believe that that's all boomers doing that at this point, because boomers are pretty old at this point. So that means, if I could just land, I think that demonstrates that those racialized ideas are beyond just the systems, but they are present in the brains and minds and hearts of individuals living today. Not everyone.
But can you share that study with us? I'd like to read it.
Sure, I can find it.
That'd be very interesting. That'd be a lot of good information in there to give some perspective on things.
I'm not the host, JP, and I apologize, but poor Phoenix has had her hand up for some time. And I didn't know if they were doing something. Okay.
Well, I kind of want to keep this as a conversation, so like we'll get to that we're keeping this flow. This is the flow we had last time, so we don't like here's the thing, I don't like the forced flow. So like if you got a hand, but just if you see a point, just jump in, because we're just trying to have a conversation. Because like here's my thing, just real quick, just to reset it. Like hands, they drive me crazy, because then people that raise their hands, well, I've had my hand up for 20 minutes, they think they have a right to speak for 20 minutes. I want to keep this like a conversation. So just like a barbershop, or just like you're hanging out with your friends, or down in your basement of your house, wherever it is, let's just have a conversation and just be respectful of others, right? Like at a bar.
And see, I agree with Fanatiq. I disagree with that, and I've heard and read that study. But the sad thing is, we cannot change everyone. And through our conversation in that last space, what I gathered is this: we're all angry at the exact same people, but we're trying to change each other's minds on why we're angry at them, and why and which color we apply that frustration towards. I am as angry at the politicians that are in power as Fanatiq is. And Fanatiq, I lived in New Orleans.
Yeah, but Haas, that's the thing though. It's here's the perspective on this. Dude, I hear the passion in your heart, and I know where you're coming from, but I don't think there's a perspective that we don't understand. It's because there's a community perspective of this too. It's not a shared experience of life. There's a different shared experience. Like I hear the passion, and and your voice that you want to do the right thing and you're a good person and you have a kind heart, but that's not a representation of what the experience is, right? Because I mean, that was something that I believed for a long time too. But then just listening to those communities and sitting for hours and hours and hours and hours in those reparation rooms to hear their perspective, I think like I finally understand, because we don't have a shared experience. And what we're saying is like, what I'm hearing is like, in schooling, there's a different perspective. Yes, we're both Gen Xers, but my experience growing up is not the same as Black Americans, even in my same generation, even my same class. There's differences, fundamental differences, and that's where the disconnect is, and that's where like the repair is needed. And I think that's where the conversation really needs to focus around, is like understanding the perspective, because that's the fundamental of everything, in my opinion.
I got you.
There, Fanatiq?
What's sad is for me.
Yes, I am. I'm looking for the study. I'll try my best to find it.
Yeah, you're fine. You don't have to send it to me now. Like, send it to me later. I'm really curious to read that, because that's a very good piece of data to have. Like, just send it to me later. It's no big deal. But I really would like to read that.
Sure thing. I will definitely find it.
Because that's a really good data point, because like, you know, that shows this, and that's the thing is like collecting this data. Like, I think moving forward, Fanatiq, like to collect this data, we really probably need to be a little bit more, almost probably tighter with the control study, because like a lot of these studies, it seems like whether it's a left leaning or right leaning, it always seems like it leans some way. And then if you do some like doing homework, it always seems like it's one side that's just trying to taint the studies, right? So I would like to really get some data too that's like something that we can actually trust for the first time, to be like just to be unbiased, right?
Oh, of course. And I'm very, very careful about which studies I read, and I actually go through and read the data and find out what they controlled for in order to make sure that it's actually accomplishing the thing that it's saying. And this study did that. And I think it's
That's awesome.
It's awesome because it was like using double blind, so that there wasn't going to be any of those kind of biases, and the sample size was really heavy. And I mean, this only kind of confirms something that we already pretty much knew, right? Like I would imagine that I would say we already knew this, but then I don't know. I think most of us would have probably recognized that. Phoenix, you have a hot mic, by the way. Most people would have probably recognized that there's like hiring discrimination within, this country. I don't think that should be like a hard opinion, a hard pill to swallow for most folks. So, I mean, the study.
But let me ask you this question. So, like, at what level of this corporate world we live in, would you say there's like a hiring discrimination? Would you say it's like lower level jobs? Would you say it's like mid-tier jobs, upper tier jobs?
I think at all levels. I mean, we already see that there's like differences when it comes towards like tenure for like college professors. American African, professors have a harder time getting tenure than their white counterparts. We obviously see when it comes towards promotion to upper level management within jobs, that there's studies that have demonstrated that there's like harder time for them, that there's hiring discrimination there. We already have large amounts of data that demonstrates that American African master's degrees holders at levels of education, associates, bachelor's, and master's degree holders make less money than their white counterparts with the exact same degree and the exact same education, right? And I'm not just saying this broadly master's degree. I'm saying if you control for the same degree that they have,
but this is the thing though. I got into a debate with a feminist once, because they said that there's a pay gap, right? And women only make 70% of men, and blah, 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 blah. The one thing that's not taken into consideration is there's a lot of different factors that could be taken into consideration when you're talking about same level of education and degree. And it's very interesting, like what career field are we talking about? And here's the other one that's a big one too.
I control that already.
Hold on. But is the income that they're going into a negotiable income, or is it a set income?
Well, I mean, it was very wide and broad, so I'm pretty sure there's going to be the majority of them are going to be negotiable.
Well, but that's the thing though. Like I've ran a dealership, and I've worked in the corporate world for a very long time. Until you get to the negotiable salaries, you're a vice president of something. So the majority of jobs don't have a negotiable salary. So that kind of taints the whole study right there. And it's the same thing I talked about the feminists. If you're talking, there's not as many women engineers, women doctors, women CEOs, you can't say you only make 70% because all you do is take the total amount of women divided it by how many are in the workforce and say, well, look, we make less, when you really don't. But
Wait,
the
but hold
negotiable
on.
jobs.
I don't like you drawing a comparison towards women and their bad arguments, because I'm not talking about women and their bad arguments. And unless
No,
you, and
all
hold
I'm
on,
saying is, I guess it's a
JP,
bad
please.
parallel. You're right.
Right, it is an incredibly bad parallel, and unless you could say that the same factors that are impacting the example that you are giving, like unless those same factors are present, then that actually has literally no bearing on the information that
Okay,
I'm giving. Hold on,
in your study, but hold on.
well, Jay,
But I was just
I
saying,
feel
in your
like
study,
every time
then
we're
let
trying
me
to make a
word.
point, you keep interrupting.
I'm just going to reword my question. So my question will be: so these jobs that are there's income disparity, are they jobs with stagnant salaries, or are they negotiable salaries?
I would have to find the studies to find out for sure, but I'm going to tell you something really quickly. It doesn't. If the salaries aren't negotiable, then why is there still a disparity?
That's Schrodinger's cat at that point. Nobody can be right or wrong because there's no credible data on either side. So it's one of those.
Wait, what do you
points.
mean? How can you say that there's no data on either side when you haven't looked at any data on this side?
No, but what I'm saying is the negotiable salary jobs are the only ones that we should be looking at, because those are the ones that actually matter. It's not the stagnant, because there's no corporation. It's like with HR law, that way that it is now, it says, oh, white guy applies, you're going to make 90,000. Oh, a Chinese guy applies, you're only making 70,000. There's no job that has that scale. This is the job. This is how much it pays. Do you want to work here? Is how 99% of jobs go.
I don't think it's true. I don't think that that's true. I think that the majority of jobs within corporate America have salary ranges. I don't think that most of them have a very static, you're going to make exactly 75,000 a year, or you're going to make exactly 85. There's a negotiable salary in the vast majority of corporate jobs that require bachelor's and master's degrees, and those ranges are going to be impacted by various factors, whether or not you have more experience with the job, your degree of education, and other whatever things that might fit. So the fact is, the vast majority of these jobs are negotiable, and there is this disparity, and it seems like those things are still racially driven.
So could that disparity be because of poor negotiating skills? I mean, that's the thing. Just to draw the conclusion, it's race-based when there's no credible data, because if someone doesn't negotiate a proper income, that's sometimes just because someone has poor negotiation skills. I mean, when you're negotiating income, I've done it before. There's a lot of different factors you got to take into consideration, and that could be some of education too, though, right?
It could be, or it could be that they recognize that they already have lower prospects of being hired, and because hiring opportunities are significantly more scarce for American Africans, then they're more reluctant to negotiate because, of course, of desperation that sets in. Because, of course, we obviously have significantly higher student loan debt, which means that we probably need to work a lot more. We need the job much more quickly. Obviously,
Fanatiq, come on. Let's be a little bit honest with the way that HR departments salivate over hiring minorities over white people. Like, they give them more. You get just equal opportunity, because I tell you what, if an HR department just looks like, okay, white guy, same qualifications, same everything, they're going to hire the black guy because that fills their slot, which is not right either. But you can't tell me that the HR person's like, oh, I'm going to hire the white person for sure. No, they salivate over hiring the classes that they need to fill those roles in because of affirmative action. I mean, come on, let's be honest.
Well, let's be honest. So then if that's the case, then you probably can't explain to me why it is that African Americans have harder times finding occupation immediately following graduation with higher degrees, right? Both bachelor's and master's degrees, right? So then if that's the case, I don't understand why that disparity exists, right? And then furthermore, I don't understand why there's disparities in incomes. I don't understand why there's disparities within unemployment. All of these things indicate that, yes, that there are obviously hiring discrimination. There are plenty of studies that say that. Hell, I mean, studies have demonstrated that they throw out resumes with black people with black sounding names. So if we already recognize that all these biases, and that's just they don't get the call back, then when you get into the interview, of course it gets even worse. So the fact of the matter is, there are all these racial biases still prevalent throughout the American culture and society. So the idea, hold on, if I can finish.
Let me ask this one question.
Why does it feel like, hold on, JP, listen, I feel like every time I'm letting you land, and every time you're stopping me from landing.
Well, no, because I don't. Okay, so like, if we're gonna have this debate, like, it's really hard to have it when you're trying to make 47 different points.
I didn't make 47 points, and I spoke for less than 2 minutes there.
Okay, so go ahead, then finish.
I don't remember what the point is, but I'm just saying, please make a note of it so that we can actually have a reasonable conversation.
All I'm saying is, like, it's really hard for you to sell that, because, like, I was just gonna ask you, have you ever worked in a corporate setting, like a high-level corporate setting?
No, I have not. I'm a musician.
Okay, so when you work in a high level corporate setting like I have, just go work with an HR department for about 12 and a half minutes, and that'll dispel that whole argument, because there's plenty of times that HR will actually push those applications forward to people like me to make hires, because those are things that they need to fill. So like, that's just the realistic of how the corporations work, is that HR departments are usually women. No offense, not a lot of male HR people, but they are going to push us in a certain directions because of certain things, because it fills certain quotas. And that's just how the corporate world works. So say there's a disparity or a bias there is right, but I don't think the bias is on the right side of what you think.
I'm sorry, I can't care less for your anecdote. I'm always going to go with the data, and there are plenty of large-scale studies that all demonstrate that the bias and discrimination is primarily and prevalent against American Africans. You can tell me your anecdote that you believe, because you're not there when you're watching what applications come in, that you believe that HR is specifically pushing American African applications to you. You can make that claim if you want to, but unfortunately what I can say is that there are studies and there are data that clearly demonstrate that there are biases against American Africans.
But I see every single application that comes in. They can't hide applications from me because it came to my desk and their desk. So this thing of cultural biases, I don't see it in the corporate world at high level jobs like we're talking about right now, because I've been part of that world and I've been involved in that world, and it's just not, it's a fallacy.
I hear you, JP. Fortunately, again, what I'm presenting to you is not what you see, because I don't care about your anecdote. What I'm presenting to you is that there is data that demonstrates that this is true, and your individual experience at an individual company can't speak to the broader systemic prevalence of this discrimination. Okay. Your anecdote bears nothing. Data bears everything.
If we're going to stay here, then that's perfectly fine, but I need you to provide that data, because I think your data is going to be tainted. Until you've proven that data, then this is a moot point.
For sure. And I guess I can find you data on hiring discrimination. Well, I already, you told me to give you the data for the Arizona study, which demonstrated it. And then I'll find you data on hiring discrimination for bachelor's holders, and the inability of American Africans to be able to find work, or the difficulty with them finding work after getting their degrees. So
yeah, because it's crazy that like my experience in real life is not what this suggestion of this study is saying. And with all my friends that work in the corporate world too, that this is really interesting, because if that's happening behind the scenes, because everybody I talk to, they don't have that shared experience in the corporate world. So I mean, if there is data showing this, then we have a much bigger problem, because we're being deceived as well.
For sure. And I think it is crazy that, like, in light of data, that someone would lean on their own individual experience. That sounds crazy to me. But so let's get to the reparations conversation. So
before you go there, Fanatiq, I'm going to come in here as the elder spokesperson for corporate America.
But I hope you don't. Please don't share with me an anecdote, though. Like, is it going to be an anecdote, or is it going to be some sort of data or something that I can say, like, hey, here's something that I can read?
Okay, I'll give you some data. I'm going to give you some data.
Okay.
I became a conspiracy theorist in November 22nd, 1963.
That's not
walking home from first grade. Okay? I've been down millions of rabbit holes, and all this data bullshit that you're blowing up here, you can't provide any receipts. It's just what I said. I had a corner office in a Fortune 100 corporation for 25 friggin' years. I was involved with thousands of HR investigations regarding my skill and my management techniques. And I can tell you that every black person I hired, every Latin person I hired, every Asian person I hired, every Moroccan person I hired respects me more than they respect themselves, because I know truth. You can come in here, push this socialist agenda on these people, and claim that your people are being not treated how they are being treated by people like me. It's total bullshit. I'm going to land my plane. I'm going to go to bed. And God bless you. I respect you as a human being. I hope that you learn to respect everybody that you meet as a human being, and you learn the truth.
Okay, so thank you for the anecdote. I did link the study to you while he was talking. You now have one of them. There are plenty that clearly demonstrate this. And as they said, that given, I'll just read one portion of it, given that all testers presented nearly identical credentials, the different responses they encountered can be attributed fully to the effects of race and criminal background. And what they're finding is that race was a huge impact.
So do you really think that this Deva page or this person that wrote this, let me just ask you first person, is really biased given her history or his?
I have no idea whether that person, this is just the first one that I found right now while that man was talking. There are plenty of studies that very clearly demonstrate this. I don't know if
but that's the thing.
Here's the problem.
Person has a complete bias. There's a complete bias with this person. So that study.
If I can finish, I don't care about the bias of the person. What I care about is how thorough the study is. And if the study is accurate,
right. But this person made their living. Hold on.
Please.
This person,
Why does it feel like you're so uncomfortable with me speaking?
I'm not, because here's the thing.
Well, if you are not, then why won't you let me respond to the thing that you just said? I'm responding to you.
It's 10 seconds.
You're saying let you finish, but you're interrupting me, JP. I don't feel like. No, JP, if I can finish.
You're good.
Thank you.
Finish.
Man, I don't know why that's so difficult to do. Look, again, you can try to dismiss data and facts with the bias of a person. You can try to do that. First off, there's a plurality of data from various places. Various people have conducted these studies. Secondly, as opposed to trying to basically dismiss the study because you don't like the person, right, which is a fallacy, we can try to find some errors with the data itself. And this particular study, I don't have their methodology on me. We can look for it, but there are plenty. Again, there's a plurality of studies, a plurality of data, all come to the same conclusion. So trying to dismiss this individual one with the person seems a little bit ridiculous.
I mean, not really, because when you see this person's works that they made a profit off of writing these racially discriminative things, like you can't really, it's like if this person's completely neutral, then we can take that as data. But when they're culturally biased, just like if you have a KKK member write this thing about how racial discrimination doesn't exist, it's going to be completely different, right? And you can't trust that source. So all I'm saying is, this source is untrustable because they have political bias. They have in every one of their works. If you go read their bio, it shows there's political bias, and that makes a fundamentally bad argument.
I don't think that a bias makes a bad argument. You would need to find me that the bias is tainted the data itself, and the data itself, again, given that there's a plurality of data, and we can look at meta-analysis of studies that clearly demonstrate that this thing is still here. Now, if you're willing to ignore meta-analysis, you're willing to ignore data, and you're more willing to focus on the individual that actually put the data there, then at that point, I don't know that anything would convince you.
It's not a thing that's convincing me. It's if you're going to give me data and there's data by someone that's completely biased. If you look at the data of the study, it's very minimal at best. It's not even talking about corporate America. It's talking about low-lying jobs, and I'm not going to argue that because that's just something that's really hard to argue, right? So if we're talking about there's this racial discrimination and this disparity in income, then show me corporate level jobs, not kitchen staff jobs, not jobs in fast food restaurants, because that's not high level corporate jobs that we're talking about. Because $5 an hour at McDonald's, it doesn't care what color you are.
Yeah, you can claim that, but that's not true either, as the data presents. And here's this. I'll list you the prior one, the Arizona study that I was talking about. I found it now while you were talking. Here's the second one from Arizona State University. It was a 3-year study where they came to the same conclusion that being an American African had a larger impact than having a felony for a white person. And they give you everything. This is obviously significantly larger, but they'll give you everything. They give you their methodological study. I mean, the different types of methodology that they use, because they had two different types. Then they did one that was involving surveys. They did another one that was like real life employers. And it came to the conclusion that yes, that this thing is very, very prevalent. And there's a plurality of data you can find everywhere that clearly demonstrate this. Can you find me a single study that ever shows that that's not true? I don't think one exists. Find the most biased person you can at the most biased university, and they can't replicate or they can't give you any data that supports that there is no discrimination. That doesn't exist.
Okay. I think we're just at this point. I think the best thing we could do is probably agree to disagree that there is racial bias, and I don't think it's as prevalent as you think. But I think that it's very convoluted, and I'd have to read that whole Arizona study to understand. But
okay, just to be clear, that this Arizona study came afterwards, as demonstrated by, like, a thing it says, unlike Pager's audit, where there was a 1-year difference between a pair of testers and when they entered the labor force, testers were not necessarily matched on age because there was a 1-year difference in the time they graduated from high school, and the first job did not begin until after high school. The resumes we created for both the in-person audit and online correspondence test match within each pair the month and year employment began. The year high school was completed was matched both between and within pairs. So this one obviously came afterwards and then tried to control for even things that the original one didn't. Again, but there's a plurality of data, and it very clearly demonstrates this. So we can agree to disagree, but it's crazy to me that we're agreeing to disagree with me giving you multiple studies that demonstrate this thing, you not being able to find a single study to the contrary. I'm more than willing to review this conversation at a later date. If you would like to talk, hold on. If you would like to talk maybe tomorrow, or I don't know, a week from now, or 2 weeks from now, hold on. If you can finish.
But if you're gonna you're putting fallacies. When you're
I'm not putting a fallacy.
I didn't. You are. What
word did I put in your mouth?
I did not say it. I did not say it all. I very specifically said that your study is flawed because the people are biased that create your studies. So there is no credibility to any of the studies that you provided. So don't put words in my mouth, especially if you're publishing this. I am going to stop you when you're saying a fallacy about something that I had said.
I didn't say.
Can we be clear on that?
Okay.
You did. You said that you provided studies and blah 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 blah. Those studies are fatally flawed just because they have bias to them. You have not provided an unbiased study yet. So then you'd say that I haven't provided anything in counter.
On the second one.
Dude, I haven't been able to read. I can't read a 35.
So then how can you say then how can you say both of the studies are biased then?
Dude, but they are biased. They look biased by the very looks of it, but I will study the second one when I have time. So don't put words in my mouth and don't try to paint me in a corner because this is not going to work, bud.
I didn't paint you in a corner. What I said was...
You were trying to paint me in a corner.
I'm sorry. If I would have finished... If I could have finished my... Okay,
and I'm not going to let you finish when you're lying.
Wow, I don't think I'm never a dishonest person. I did not lie. What I said was I provided 2 studies and you provided none, and I said I would be willing to review the conversation at a later date, in which you will then be able to get the studies if you would like to be able to give them to me.
You segment this to try to make me look in a bad space. So, dude, I didn't provide any studies because there's no need to provide studies because you haven't proven your point. So when you want, I'll provide studies when I'm trying to counter a point that's been proven, but your point hasn't been proven, so there's no need for me to provide a study.
I understand. If studies and data don't prove my point, then nothing will. So then we can just move on.
Biased studies and biased data does not prove your point. You're 1,000% correct.
Okay, you're for sure. All right, so now to the reparations conversation. Which was what we originally intended to talk about in the first place. I would have probably had these studies on hand had I been known that we were going to be talking about that, but I knew that it existed and I was accurate and that it was Arizona State University. So moving forward, reparations. It sounded like at one point from the very first conversation that you were against it, and I needed to understand why. So I guess I would ask you first. How did you feel about Japanese receiving reparations for what they went through in the internment camps?
Whoever said I was against it, I never said I was against it. I said the whole discussion was reparations are bullshit, change my mind. That was the whole discussion. So it's never took a position on it. It said change my mind.
How can I change your mind if you don't have a position?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Do you think, okay, so let's get into reparations. Let's talk about it first. Like, what is your definition of reparations then?
I don't subscribe to proprietary definitions, but I can look it up for you really quickly. But off the top of my head, I know that reparations are to make amends or expiation for a previous wrong done or some wrong committed. I think that's what it is. And so, yeah, I would say it's amends or expiation.
Okay, so just for context, so do you think that reparations should be paid out from real time back to 1776, or should they start with people in 1706 and move forward from there? So people that were you see what I'm saying? Do you see the timeline should go forwards or backwards?
I would say that reparations should be based off of whatever the harm is being caused, and then something to repair or amend the specific harm that's being caused. So if something happened, I don't know, like in the Civil War veterans coming back from there weren't able to like utilize the GI Bill, then we would probably start from there for that specific harm and say these people need reparations for that specific harm. If we want to talk about like housing discrimination, then we would probably go to wherever that harm is and probably have some economists calculate that difference and what should have been, appropriate. And it just depends on the various areas of discrimination. If you look at something like education discrimination, and we find that obviously that there's like been a drastic toll taken on American Africans with the cost of education such that the majority of people graduating have student loan debt, I would say that we would start there and see how much their student loan debt is and start calculating.
Okay, so who should be the first? Okay, so like I said, so should we be paying reparations out for people that are affected by people that were enslaved, or how should we start the reparations on a timeline? Should we start it with more current events or events further in the past?
I would probably say the smartest thing would be to probably come up with a comprehensive study that like details all of those previous injuries and then pays a reparations for pays reparation like as a whole to the community, and I would say that would probably make the most sense.
So now only to descendants of slaves.
I would say I believe that reparations for any harm should be given to the individuals or to the collective who received those harms. But I do believe that there should be an independent claim for reparations specifically for our lineage, that is the lineage of descendants of slaves. However, that doesn't exclude any other group from having also additional claims to reparation. And there might even be some overlap. For example, I would imagine there are probably some immigrant black people, immigrant Africans who also endured types of racial discrimination, and for them maybe they can get their own independent study and that would end up determining what their reparation should be. But the claim and the focus of this conversation should be specifically for American descendants of slavery.
Okay, so just American descendants of slavery, so those are the only people that should be paid out initially.
I'm not saying initially. I'm saying this is the focus of this conversation. This independent reparations claim, which doesn't dismiss or diminish any other person's reparations claim. There's still reparation claims that probably have to be given to Native Americans that didn't dismiss, diminish, or impact the reparations that were owed to my people. So in the same sense, what the reparations that would be given to my people shouldn't impact, dismiss, or diminish the reparations that would be owed to any other group.
So what does this look like for your people? What's the general consensus or what's an idea of what this looks like?
Well, for me, with my dream reparation, I think the thing that makes the most sense would be probably something that focuses specifically in the areas of housing, as we spoke about last Sunday, housing, education, business loans, and direct cash payments.
Okay, so by housing, what do you mean housing?
Well, again, we pointed out the housing discrimination that like negatively impacted American Africans for all, if we go all the way back to the 50s and the 60s. And so we look at all of that and we say what has been the impact. And we obviously understand that real estate is the largest generator of wealth in the country, and that 70% of wealth portfolios in the country are real estate. And so then if we can trace that discrimination to current harms, then we probably need to start looking again, having economists do large-scale studies to be determined what that account should be. And I would say that the reparation would probably be the smartest to come in the form of, as I said, mortgage loans, like zero interest mortgage loans, and a mortgage forgiveness for pre-existing loans for American Africans.
So 0% interest. Okay, so being that these would be funded by a bank, do you understand? You understand how
Nope.
interest works, right?
They wouldn't be funded by the bank, they'd be funded by the government.
So who funds the government then?
Taxes and appropriations.
Who pays taxes?
All America does.
So all Americans will be paying for this. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say that the people that would be paying it would be the government, and the government would continue to appropriate funds the same way that it always does, which is on behalf of the people. Sure.
So the people the American taxpayers are expected to pay for this. Is that correct?
Sure. Or other there's other ways of appropriating funds. That's not the only way that the United States makes money. The United States makes money through loans. The United States makes money through tariffs. What's it called? Exports. So there's just various ways that the United States makes money. They would just need to appropriate the money that they make.
Okay,
and
but at the end
for us.
At the end of the day, but it's taken out of American pockets, whatever way you want to call it, taxes, tariffs, whatever you want to call it, so we can all
If you would
agree.
like to say that, sure.
Okay, so when with slavery, who owned slaves? Was it the middle class? Was it the upper class? Was it the lower class? Did everybody own them?
I'm not talking about reparations for slavery. The thing that I'm talking about is reparations for housing discrimination, education discrimination, when it came to the GI Bill and other financial discrimination. However, yes, I do believe that there might also need to be reparation for slavery. I tend not to focus on that one because it tends to be a little bit more nebulous, which is why I primarily start with something like housing discrimination. So if we can focus on that, let's go there.
So, but you, a little while ago, you said reparations for the descendant of slaves. So, but it's the descendant of slaves, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to unpack how the housing discrimination impacted it, right?
No, so just to be clear, the reason why I use descendant of slavery is to determine a lineage, not to determine the specific reparation that would be given, but a lineage. Because while I did mention descendants of slavery, I then immediately followed it up with specifically naming housing discrimination, education discrimination.
Okay, so are you saying that your postulation is that a descendant of a slave has more housing discrimination than a black person that's not a descendant of a slave?
I'm not drawing a comparison between those two because it's not necessary. Because even if descendants of slave have identical or even less discrimination than an immigrant black person, then that wouldn't change the fact that we still deserve reparations for the existing discrimination. So the comparison is not necessary.
So the foundation is based off of slavery. Then we can both agree, because you're saying that you're saying a descendant of a slave has more right than a non-descendant slave. Skin color does not matter. They're both black people. One's a descendant of slaves, one's not. One has more rights of discrimination than the other, is what you're saying.
I'm sorry, you're not following because I didn't say that. I'll say it again. Do you want me to repeat it one more time? I said, I'm not drawing a comparison between a descendant of slave and an immigrant African because I don't believe that the comparison is necessary, because hypothetically, if the descendant of slaves received less discriminations than immigrant Africans, we would still be entitled to reparations for the specific levels of discrimination that we received. Therefore, if we received more, it wouldn't matter, because we would still be getting a just reparations for the specific harm that was caused. So the comparison does nothing to aid an economist or any other person who's studying in determining the amount of reparations that we should get. Comparison does nothing here. So because of that, I'm not drawing a comparison. I'm only focusing on the specific harm that happened to descendants of slaves for this very specific claim.
Okay, so this very specific claim, to qualify for it, you have to be a descendant of a slave. Can we agree on that?
Sure, you have to be of that lineage, yes.
Okay, so it only pertains to descendant slaves. So their discrimination is then different than the other shared black experience, right? So I'm just saying there's a difference between descendant slaves and non-descendant slaves.
I'm sorry.
Is that true?
I'm sorry if you didn't follow. What I said earlier was that there might be overlap. I'm pretty sure there are some African immigrants who can demonstrate that they also received some of the same discrimination, that American Africans did, that American descendants of slaves did. So because of that, they probably have a just reparations claim as well. I'm saying because of the fact that I'm focusing on this lineage, on specifically, that would be, that's what I wanted to constrain the conversation to. Again, this does not diminish or dismiss anyone else's claim to reparations. I'm specifically constraining the conversation for sake of brevity and just so that we can be more concise.
Yeah, you're using word magic, because what you're saying is that descendant slaves have more of a right to a reparation than a black person. So I'm just breaking it down into plain language. You can use your word soup and word magic to try to fancy it up, but at the end of the day, in plain language, that's core to what we believe, right?
Okay, so let me just make sure I'm really crystal clear in plain language so everyone will understand. I don't think I deserve more reparations than anyone else.
But you deserve to be
hold
at the
on.
front of the line.
I'm limiting the conversation specifically for the sake of keeping it simpler so that we can discuss a very specific claim of reparations. There are multiple claims of reparations. The country has already paid out reparations to certain individuals. There are plenty of injuries done by the United States government. I'm focusing on a specific harm against a specific group of people for this conversation. However, there are plenty of conversations that can be had for other people to talk about their reparations claims. I'm not saying I deserve more reparations than anyone else. I'm saying this is what I'm talking about specifically is a specific claim. In other words, let me give you a really simple analogy to make sure everyone truly can understand. If I have an injury in my arm, right, like a broken arm, and I also happen to have, I don't know, a broken toe, when I go see the doctor who focuses, or better, I'm sorry, if I have an injured kidney, okay, and then I also happen to have a damaged heart, okay, when I go and see the nephrologist, that doesn't mean that my heart concern isn't also of importance. It means that this just happens to be the specific claim that I'm focusing on right now. This doesn't dismiss or diminish the concerns of my heart. When I go see a cardiologist, that doesn't dismiss or diminish the claims of my kidneys. Each of these things are independent. So what I'm talking about right now is a specific claim for my people that does not dismiss, diminish anyone else's claims, and I'm not putting any type of comparison, which would be what would be required for you to say that I'm making a claim that I deserve it more than another individual. I'm specifically talking about a very specific claim. That's it.
So your specific claim is only for the descendants of slaves.
This specific claim that we're discussing is constrained to the descendants of slaves in this country.
Only
American
slaves.
slavery. Descendants of American slavery, yes.
Okay, so I like that. Okay, so Fanatiq, let's say we traced your lineage all the way back to the descendants of slaves. Your great-great-great-grandfather was a slave. Okay, now in 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the bill, the Emancipation Reparations Act.
Sir, I'm
So
sorry to
if your
interrupt, but I'm not talking about
great-great-grandfather-
slavery. Slavery is not the topic.
Hey,
I'm not talking about slavery.
Fanatiq, we let you speak. We let you say everything you need to say. So you're
Okay,
gonna let Eddie speak.
I'm going to dismiss everything you're saying then, because I'm not talking about
Okay,
slavery.
see?
But go ahead and finish.
No, Fanatiq, let him finish.
if he signed it and took the $300, then you're disqualified.
Okay, so
Would that be
moving.
correct?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm not having a conversation about slavery. Unfortunately, if you couldn't keep up, I don't know how long you've been here, but this conversation is not about slavery. So again, when we're talking about housing discrimination, which can be quantified, which we have plenty of examples of, that is still ongoing, then when we're having that conversation, that's what the reparations discussion has been about thus far. I do not wish to discuss reparations for slavery, not dismissing the fact that reparations are owed for slavery, but I'm choosing, again, this is another constraint, to focus specifically on this conversation on
so
housing
let's
discrimination.
just move to housing. We're not going to ever agree on this because, like, I don't agree fundamentally with what you're saying, but that's fine.
Well, which part
can
did you
agree to
disagree with so far?
I
I'm
disagree
sorry.
with, like, I think it's incredibly short-sighted just to go for particularly descendants of slaves, but that's just where you and I are going to have to disagree on this. But let's move into the housing discrimination, okay? So when we're talking about housing discrimination, you said this very specifically, you want banks, right, to give you home loans at 0%, correct?
I want the United States government to give us home loans at 0%.
Okay, so the United States government, it doesn't even give the military that kind of loan, but hey, let's go with that. So you want them to give it. So what do you do with the people who default on those home loans? What's the process look like for that? What's the loss recovery on that?
So the loss recovery is pretty freaking amazing, and I think this is what makes this so beneficial. Thank you for asking. It's a great question. What ends up happening is if someone decides to acquire a piece of property and say that property is valued at, I don't know, $500,000, okay, in California, and they get a interest-free loan on that property and they begin making their payments on that property. Well, the value of the property is $500,000, but obviously real estate in California has an appreciation rate of about 12% annually in the state of California.
That's a fallacy. That's a fallacy because the markets have ebbs and flows. So you can't say that the market
That's why I averaged it out.
In California. No, it's not a 12% raise on average out. That's a fallacy right there. I'll be right back with that info. That's not even close to the truth.
Find me what the average is then. Thank you. So, assuming that it has an appreciation value of appreciation rate of about 12% in the state of California, then that means every year that person is making those payments, that the value of the property that they'd be making the payments on will be increasing for the vast majority of time, right? And so that means that the person will then have equity, which is an amazing economic vehicle. Secondly, if at any time the person defaulted on that loan, the government could then seize that property, and upon seizing that property, they would basically have the value of that home, right? The property value. So then if the house appreciated, I don't know, over 10 years, and we'll just say we're going to keep it a flat 12% for 10 years, right? Then, I mean, what would that be? Oh, how do you do that math? I guess it would just be 120%. Am I tripping?
Yeah, you're tripping. You need to hold on a minute because your math's way off, buddy.
Is it? Which part?
Well,
wouldn't it be 120% if it was 10 years and appreciating at 12% annually? That would be 120%. We're not doing compound, just to keep it simple. So it'd be 120%. So then that means that the house would have gone up 600,000, right? So it'd be about
so the average house has gone up in California, taking all the downturns. The 4 downturns they have is only 2.5% from 1970 to 2024. So it's only gone up 2.5%, not 12. There's a huge difference between 2.5 and 12.
You're saying between 1970 to 2024 that the housing market has only increased by 2%?
Yeah. On average, every year, 2%. You said 12% per year annually is what you said.
I did.
So I'm
but
saying
you know what,
it
here,
went up 2% annually over those 54 years.
So then let's just go ahead and accept that then. We'll just go ahead and go with your number, even though you're wrong. 2%.
Wait. I just asked Rock, and it took all the aggregated data, and it gives you the mathematical calculation. It says, on average, using all the aggregated data, taking all the influxes, the upturns and the downturns in the house market, 1980, 1999, 2008. So I can name all these housing downturns and then take all that aggregate data and average it out. So to an average over 54 years was 2.5%. Some years were higher, right? But some years were a lot lower because there was a lot of years where there's losses, my friend. You have to calculate that into your magical equation. So you have to take everything into consideration.
All right, so it's 2%. So then if it's 2%, then that means that the government would still be up on the property. So that means now if the property was originally $500,000, like we were saying on the loan, and the house goes up in value by 2%, then it's going to go up an additional $10,000 every year. And if the person defaults on year 5, assuming we're not compounding the gain, then that means that the government just made $50,000 in that property.
Okay, so let's
they
talk
would be able
about
to
that.
sell that property.
So
at that
let's
point
talk about that.
for
Let's talk
its
about that.
original value.
Okay, so let's talk about that before we get too far into this. What's the average cost of repairs on a home post foreclosure across the United States?
I don't know.
Okay, what's the average cost of the real estate fees to sell that house again?
So, listen. The fact
No.
You're just gonna
you get to answer my questions. Don't hey, look at this.
If you're
how
just
it works,
if
man.
you're going if you're going
you
to
can't
just
answer my question.
if you're going to just shotgun questions at me that don't mean anything, then
What do you mean they don't mean anything?
Disengage from the conversation.
Fanatiq, that's fine. If you want to disengage, that's fine. But remember, you said that they made $50,000 in profit. My first question to you is, what's the average cost to get a home?
I said I don't know, and you didn't answer the question either.
You don't know. Okay, so you said you don't know, and then my follow-up question was,
hold on.
How much is a real estate fee? So I'm showing that the profit you perceive right there is already gone and probably lost another $30,000. So that $50,000 of profit you're calling it is really about a $30,000 net loss. So good try.
All right. So you're going to ask me questions, not answer the questions, and then just move on to other questions. So then what was the purpose of asking the question?
I just destroyed your argument in 3 questions. But what's your question?
Because you didn't answer it for me. If I don't know the answer, you asked me a question and I didn't know the answer, and then you didn't fill in the answer. So what was the purpose of asking the question?
You made a postulation that they made $50,000 in profit, but you don't even know anything about real estate fees. You don't know anything about how much it costs to recondition a home to get it back ready to the market. You don't have any of those answers. So like basically you're just saying a bunch of words with no facts, because if I was going to say those words, I'd have facts to back me up. I'm just asking you questions to try to get your perspective.
That you don't even know the answer to yourself. So then the fact of the matter is,
I don't know the answer. You don't know the answer.
You do.
So why do I need to know the answer?
If you're
you want me to look up the answer for you? I'll tell you what, buddy. I'll look up the answer for you.
Okay, I'm just going to say for the record, if you're asking a question in bad faith that you don't know the answer to, and then making calculations extrapolated from the answer to the question that you don't have the answer to, then that means that you're lying. So in other words, if you're saying, well, the average cost to repair a home, to get it back into standing so that a foreclosed home is X, and therefore we're subtracting X from the $50,000 profit in order to come to the conclusion that we're at a loss, you would need to know what X value is. But you don't know what X value is, which is why you're looking it up now, which is why it's bad faith and disingenuous. Nice try. Moving forward, so the fact of the matter is...
No. You don't get to do that in here because you're being a logical fallacy right now, because that's not what I said at all.
Okay.
You got caught in a bold-faced lie because you don't know. Here's the thing. You're trying to sell product. You have no idea about the product. Now, if I was trying to sell a product, you're not trying to... See, you're trying to sell this reparations thing on me. You're trying to sell on this housing thing on me. And you're trying to convince me, because you clearly the title says change my mind, not your mind, but my mind. But you're trying to convince me, but you don't have any facts or data to prove anything that you say. You're just coming up here spitting words and then trying to use word soup to try to make me look like an ass. But guess what? You're the one who looks like an ass right now because you have not made any points. You should have some data to back that average cost up. Tell me how much the real estate fees cost, because I got 8 more questions. So your thing of $50,000 profit, there's no argument there. There is zero argument there because it's actually a net loss. And I'll get you the stats and data, but I'll do your job for you because you're incapable of doing it yourself. You want to start a class and that kind of stuff? Let's go, my friend. Let's go.
All right. So let's go ahead and go. And I want to make sure that you're talking about houses that have been foreclosed on within 5 years of ownership of that home.
Okay, then tell me the data. Then tell me that data. If you have all those data, you have AI.
I don't have to have that data. I don't have to have that data.
It's my question to you. Okay, so what I'm telling you is listen. So in a court of law, okay.
Now we're talking about legal.
Hold on. No, Fanatiq, you're in my room. It says hold on. It says change my mind. Okay, You have to prove your points. I'm the defense. You're the offense. You're the prosecutor. You have to prove your case. I don't have to prove my defense because your case is not even made yet. Because every point that you've made, I've asked for the facts and data to prove your point. You say, I have no evidence to prove my point. You should find it. As a prosecutor, that says, I have no evidence to convict you, but you should find some. As a defense, it's not my job to find evidence to support your point. Your job is to find evidence to support your point because I'm asking you a question, and that's how this works. And that's why you're getting destroyed right now. Okay, let's be honest. You're getting destroyed right now. You look really bad, so let's keep going.
Oh, JP, this is embarrassing for you, and you're not even smart enough to be embarrassed.
Not at all, dude.
Okay,
not at all.
I'm sure.
You can ask it. I'm sure there's not very many people in this room. It doesn't really matter, but anybody who listens to this, they're going to laugh because you look really silly right now because you have not been able to answer one of my questions with any kind of facts or data. Everything you come up with is either A, biased, or B, is so impossibly long, I can't read it in 10 seconds. And C, you can't even answer the simplest questions like, what are the costs of repairing these homes? Well, I don't know. Well, if you're going to make the claim that there's profit and someone asks you, well, how come there's no profit? Where's this? That's not something I'm doing wrong. That's something you can't answer. You're trying to sell me snake oil, but you can't tell me nothing about it.
Okay, you're right. So I can't tell you anything about it. So anyway, that's my proposition when it comes to home ownership. And I don't believe that there's any data that exists. Okay, right? Because last time when I gave you data, that's why I'm not going to waste my energy giving you data right now and looking up specifically what the average cost to repair a foreclosed home after 5 years of ownership. I'm not going to do that. And the reason why I'm not going to do that is because I've obviously recognized that I know that when last time I gave you data, you said it was biased. And so then you were unwilling to actually interact with the data. So then because of that, no matter what data I give you, you're probably going to say it's biased.
See, now you're playing the victim card. Here comes a cute little, no. Here comes the cute little victim card that you're going to play now. So you're not going to pay me the bad shade, dude. My man, all I'm asking is for facts and data and questions, and that's my right to ask you questions. You can't answer those questions, so don't throw a tantrum in here. Go collect some data. Come back when you can have this conversation because you're not even ready to have this conversation yet because I've asked you the most simplest questions. You can't defend any of your points, dude. Okay. You can't defend any of your points, and that's why this is just silly because you haven't had one defense yet. I mean, there's no way I'm wrong. I'm sorry, but you're just wrong in this argument right now because you can't even give me any of these points, dude. And like I said, man, it's not my job to prove those points. It's your job to defend your argument.
I think you're right. Let me ask you a quick question really quick. What percentage of mortgages are foreclosed on in the United States?
Well, it's senseless anyway, Jay. because it's never going to happen.
Hey Jay, can you answer the question?
Fanatiq, the victim, is never going to get his reparations.
Jay, what percentage
and
of
he's
mortgages...
just trying to create more victims because he doesn't want to be alone.
Hey Jay,
So it's a pointless endeavor anyway.
Hey Jay.
Oh, I know, Eddie. It's
I got you, Jay. So you're not going to answer the question? So you're no longer willing to engage?
Argument, and it's
wow.
Just so
I think that obviously demonstrates that you weren't able to have the conversation. I knew it.
People are.
I knew it.
Poor people, middle class people, wealthy people. Yeah, everybody.
Hey Jay. Jay, what percentage of homes are foreclosed on in the United States? Answer that question.
Fanatiq, I'm done with you. You lost the argument. Have a nice night. Bye-bye.
Good try. Buddy.
That's what middle class people, wealthy people,
Hey,
yeah, everybody.
He removed me. Yo, listen, that is wild. So first I was doing word. I think that's what the thing is. People love to use the word salad because of the fact that, like, when you say something and explain it in a way that they can't actually keep up with, that is their methodology. Right? So in this case, word magic. It was word magic. Like, what are we talking about? Like, bro, I think I'm pretty straightforward. I understand why he would say it's magic, because I'm too consistent and I make sure that I cover all the traps so that he doesn't he's not able to do it. If you remember the beginning of the conversation, he was saying things like, what was it? He was saying, does no one else deserve reparations and things like that, because he wanted to try to find some way of like trapping me, right? Like that was his whole goal. So it's like, no, I'm not saying no one else does. I'm not saying, well, okay, what about, are you comparing who deserves more? I'm not drawing a comparison. I'm saying I'm focusing on the specific claim. I don't think the other ones matter. No, whoa, what about? And it's just, yeah, it's he tried his best to push me into an avenue that I wasn't going, and of course he gets embarrassed by it.